Welcome to Beth's Happy Home. I'm going to present my most aggressive project that I've ever done for my YouTube channel. And it is a comparison of popular sugars. I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of different alternative sugars popping up in recipes lately. And I was especially noticing maple syrup coming up. And I thought, you know, why would you use maple syrup? Because I associated it with a strong flavor. Anyway, I got to doing some research, and my daughter-in-law, who is studying nutrition at the university, was giving me information as she was learning it, and it really piqued my interest. And so I dug into it and did some research. Now, why should you believe me? And I'll explain that. The first reason is this channel is not monetized. In other words, I don't get any money for any of the videos that I make at this point when I'm making this video. And the other thing is I don't have any sponsors, and so none of these products these manufacturers are going to pay me to promote their product, and that's significant. The third reason is that I have been a newspaper columnist, and I have been a freelance writer, and I have been and I am a historical fiction writer, and so I have learned to do very, very careful research. And I have found that if someone is selling something, that you have to kind of ignore what they have to say promoting their product. And if they are not selling something and they have data that is published in reputable journals to support their claims, then you can rely on that. So I only use those sources. What I'll start off with sugar is that too much is not good for you. And we Americans eat much too much sugar on a daily basis. That is added sugar. We're only talking about added sugar for our purposes today. So the ones that I'm going to compare are agave nectar, coconut palm sugar, honey, maple syrup, and regular table sugar. The first thing that we're going to compare is the agave. Now, agave has kind of a grassy undertone. It's very sweet. It's about 1.5 times sweeter than regular table sugar. It's a liquid form, always about the same consistency as maple syrup, or the fake maple syrup that you buy in the store. So one cup of agave nectar has 680 calories. Now, the coconut palm sugar, I read two different things. One said that they tap the coconut palm tree, and take the sap and cook it down into a sugar. And another one said that they use the flowers and they extract the sugar from that. And this is the result. It's a dry sugar, it's a dark brown, it's very loose, consistency like sand. 1 cup of coconut palm sugar has 720 calories, and it is roughly equivalent in sweetness to regular table sugar. It does have another little bit of an undertone that's kind of reminiscent of coffee. Honey is 1.5 times sweeter than sugar, regular table sugar, just like the agave is, but 1 cup has 1,031 calories in it. Maple syrup, you know how honey is made. The bees gather the nectar from flowers, and then they distill it in their bodies. They dehydrate it by flapping their wings, and they store it in little wax hexagons in their hive. So that's how it's made. It's made inside their bodies and by their wings. And then maple syrup has, let's see, right here, 819 calories. It's made from tapping the maple tree, taking the sap out of it in the springtime, early in the springtime or late winter when the sap starts to rise, and cooking it down into a very sweet syrup. Maple syrup is 3 times sweeter than regular table sugar. And then obviously table sugar is the standard that we're using. So 1 cup has 773 calories. Now, here's one more number, and I didn't buy high fructose corn syrup because there is actually 3 different types. There's the 45 strength, that means it's 45% fructose, which would actually be less fructose than this or this and much less than this. But it has 937 calories per cup of high fructose corn syrup. So we're going to use that also just as kind of a comparison. So another thing that I wanted to compare was the amount of calories that you have by the way that you would use it, because it's sweeter than sugar. You're not going to use a cup of honey in place of a cup of regular sugar because the honey is much sweeter. You don't need as much. So I broke it down for you. I just did the math. Agave nectar is 1.5 times sweeter than sugar, and so if you adjust the amount that you would use in a recipe for sweetness, you would get 448 calories. So the equivalent of a cup would be 448 calories. The coconut palm sugar is equivalent straight across with regular sugar, with regular table sugar, so it's 720. It has its full amount. The honey is 1.5 times, and so that comes in at 680. And when it's adjusted for sweetness, maple syrup, though, as I said, is 3 times sweeter, and so you only need 1/3 as much, and so it comes in at 273 calories as you would use it in a recipe. And then sugar, of course, is straight across. And then high fructose corn syrup, when adjusted for sweetness, comes in at 618. So let's look at the adjustments. Agave is 440, 720 for coconut palm sugar, 680 for honey. So coconut palm sugar, table sugar are the highest, but close third is honey, and then high fructose corn syrup is 4th. Agave is next. So, and then of course maple is the lowest. So when you're adjusting for calories, the maple syrup really makes a lot of sense to use as a substitute for regular table sugar, because you're going to consume much less of it than you are of these other products. So a little bit goes a long way in the case of maple syrup. So there is another factor, though, and that is that the chemical compound that makes up each of these sugars is different for each one. So this regular table sugar is sucrose. It's just a big sack of sucrose, and sucrose is 50% fructose, 50% glucose. So glucose is the type of energy that your body needs, every cell of your body needs to function, and that's what you need to operate. Before your body can move, you have to convert sugar, you have to convert some food source into glucose. That's what we burn. And but fructose is not digested in the same way. It's digested in the liver, and so the liver, if it has too much fructose, becomes fatty and it stops functioning as well, and you end up with all kinds of medical complications due to a failing liver that you're not going to have if you're avoiding fructose. And that's why there's so much negative publicity about high fructose corn syrup, because by using the word fructose, it's kind of signaling that that's really high in fructose, which is very, very hard on your liver. Now, too much of fructose or glucose is going to be hard on your body. So, either one is not going to be good for you. And if you're diabetic, of course, either one is going to be hard on you. But there are all kinds of ailments that are very avoidable if we just would cut out sources of both kinds of sugar, but particularly fructose. It really is damaging. But part of the hype against high fructose corn syrup is very deceptive, because there are 3 different grades of high fructose corn syrup, and one is only 45% fructose. One is 55%, and that is by far the most common. And then there are some applications where they will go with a 90% concentration of fructose, but 55 is kind of the standard amount of fructose that you're going to get in high fructose corn syrup. But what you may not realize is that sugar, regular sugar, this kind, is 50% fructose. So there's only a 5% difference between that and high fructose corn syrup. Honey is actually higher in most cases. It has between 50 and 60% fructose, the sugar in it. Now, they usually will say that it's 40% fructose, 30% glucose, and then they say the rest is water, but we're only analyzing the sugar portion of it, and so that brings it up to 60% of the honey, or even more, is actually, the honey sugar is fructose. So most honey is going to be higher in fructose than high fructose corn syrup. Coconut palm sugar is very similar in its composition to regular sugar, but it is going to tend lower. It's going to be lower than most high fructose corn syrup and lower than most table sugar. The surprise one is agave nectar, which is absolutely loaded. It is averaging between 80 and 90% fructose. And so compared to high fructose corn syrup, this is very, very high. It's as high as the very highest concentration that is ever used. So agave is going to be very hard on your liver, having agave. In fact, it tastes good and it is relatively lower in calories than table sugar, but with that huge amount of fructose, I say it's on the naughty list and needs to stay there. Then it points out the hero in this, maple syrup has only between 4 and 8% fructose. And so you're getting your sugar from glucose. Now, the maple syrup also has the advantage of being so much sweeter than regular sugar. And so you can use a very tiny amount, and then that's going to reduce the impact of the glucose on you a lot also because of its composition. A word about honey. Now, you have heard the hype, I am sure, that if you take honey that is locally raised, it will desensitize you to the pollens that are causing your allergies. And I've done a bunch of research into that, and that has been completely debunked. And this is why. This is the most compelling information I felt like. That, for one thing, bees gather honey from flowers, but flowers keep their pollen in the flower itself. And most people, the vast majority, don't have pollen allergies to flower pollen because flower pollen is huge. You would know if you inhaled a little piece of pollen from a flower. But most of us are, if we have allergies to plants, it's from the pollen that comes from trees and it comes from grass, and that isn't where the bees are harvesting their honey. And besides that, there is not enough pollen in honey that you could possibly be desensitized by it. And I consulted the research done by allergists who are medical doctors who have studied this. They've made it their life's work, and they say that there's not enough, there's not anywhere close to enough. There's like between 0.1 and 0.4% pollen in any sample of honey, and you're going to get a similar percentage of bee body parts and other debris in your honey, and so you might be equally desensitized to those. I'm kidding. Anyway, so the whole hype about using honey for curing allergies is plain false. And if you have noticed a better, that they've gotten better yourself, I strongly suspect that it was the placebo effect. Anyway, so enough of dissing on honey. I like honey, obviously. I buy it, I use it, I enjoy it. But I'm trying to be much more moderate in the way I consume it. The palm sugar, you know, it doesn't have any particular sins. It's a little lower in fructose than regular table sugar. It's similar in calories. The one thing that is kind of interesting about it is that it does have that little bit of an aftertaste or a flavor that is similar, kind of reminiscent to coffee. It's kind of tasty. I kind of like it. I don't think I will buy it again because I don't love it, but as an alternative, you know, it's kind of fun. And I would mainly use it in to sweeten my cocoa or something like that, because I like that little bit of an undertone flavor. And then agave actually is very good tasting. If you mix this stuff with some lime juice and cook some chicken in it, and then use that sauce over rice, it's really delicious. But just give your liver a warning beforehand that you're about to give it a big huge slug of fructose. So the next phase of this is to actually bake with some of this and see how it affects the flavor of my traditional banana bread recipe. So that's coming up. Here's where the rubber meets the road. This is the taste test. For this banana bread, I made 5 times a regular recipe in the same pot, in the same bowl. Mixed it all up, divided it by weight into identical bowls, and then added the sweetener according to the level of sweetness that they are reported to have. So the sugar was 1 cup. The coconut palm sugar is also supposed to be equivalent, so it had 1 cup. The agave had 2/3 of a cup. The honey had 2/3 of a cup. The maple syrup had 1/3 of a cup because it's supposed to be the sweetest. And then I baked them all at the same time, and this is how they turned out. So we rated them for the level of sweetness, and frankly the crumb was very similar on all of them, although the one with the regular table sugar has a little bit more of a caramelized crustiness on the top, which is pleasant. The other one that has it is the other one that was dry, the coconut palm sugar. However, the thing that was very interesting was that the one with just 1/3 of a cup of the maple sugar was distinctly less maple syrup, right? Was distinctly less sweet. And so the ranking for the sweetness level for these 5 identical loaves other than the sweetener was the table sugar was the sweetest, but that the table sugar would have added 773 calories to this pan of banana bread. The second sweetest one was the agave nectar, and it would have added 448 calories to this recipe. The next one would have been the honey and the coconut palm. Well, no, the honey was sweeter, and it would have added 680 calories. The coconut palm was next, so it would have been 720. So that makes me conclude that the coconut palm is less sweet than regular table sugar. So the calories are slightly less, but it is noticeably less sweet than regular table sugar. So you can't really use that one straight across. And then the maple sugar for this recipe, yeah, I keep calling it sugar, we're talking syrup. The maple syrup was the least sweet, but it would have only added 273 calories. The sweetener would have been 273 calories in that recipe. So I wanted to test it and see if it held true using a different medium, and so I made a big quart of cocoa and left out the sweeteners, mixed it all up and poured it into 5 identical bowls, sweetened each one with the proportionate amount of sugar. So I used a tablespoon in this one, which made it very, very sweet. I used a teaspoon in the maple syrup one. I used a teaspoon and a half. I used 2 teaspoons in the honey one. I used 2 teaspoons in the agave one, and a full tablespoon in the coconut palm one. And the rankings came out and Jeff and I were the only ones that were testing them. But I did a blind study by marking the numbers of each one on the bottom of the plate. So it was, you know, fairly scientific, but there were only 2 people testing it. And they came out exactly the same with the cocoa. So it wasn't the baking that made it taste less sweet. But then, so I decided to try to see what the effect would be if I added an extra teaspoon. And so it ended up being the same amount of maple syrup that was added as the honey and the agave, because these came out really close in the sweetness, enough that you couldn't distinguish them. Although you could taste the flavor of the honey in that cocoa, and that was the only one where you could actually taste the sweetener. And when I added the extra teaspoon of maple syrup into the cocoa, it became the second sweetest. So my conclusion was that maple syrup is sweeter than honey. It's probably closer to 2 times sweeter than regular table sugar, but this is 1.5, and the honey is 1.5, the agave is 1.5. So that's kind of the unexpected results, and so I had to alter the ranking for the calories contributed for maple syrup, because if you're doing 66%, it's going to come out at 410 calories that the maple syrup would have added to this recipe if I'd used it to make an equivalent sweetness. So even though it's purported to be 3 times, I would say, based on my test and based on this product, which is Sugar Moon is the organic brand that it is, golden maple syrup, I would say that it's 2 times sweeter than honey, or sweeter than sugar. So that's the skinny on all of these sugars. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to make them, but don't throw any mud, because I researched this carefully enough that I'm confident that I know what I'm talking about. Thanks for watching.